All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Living Room Lecture Series. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we have Ancient Maya Archaeology of the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve, Belize, by Dr. Jon Spenard. My name is Dante Ferenga, and I'm the Development and Marketing Director at the San Diego Archaeological Center. Just a few announcements before we get started. This Saturday, November 12th, in the center classroom, we will be screening a couple of our past lectures, including Looking Down the Rabbit Hole, Santee Greens Revisited by Dr. Stan Berryman, and Amelia Earhart Archaeology, Testing the Nikumaroro Hypothesis by Dr. Tom King. No reservations are necessary. We hope you can join us. Want to share your passion for archaeology with others? For those of you who are local, you can become an SDAC docent, where you can engage museum guests through discussion and guided tours of our exhibits. We are currently accepting applications for volunteers, including museum docents, as well as interns, so apply today if you are interested. Our next Living Room lecture will be on December 8th. We welcome back Dr. Philip Goshinsky to talk about a day in the life of a California gold rush physician. You won't want to miss his presentation. Details on this and other information about the center, our curation efforts, and our other programming can be found online at sandiegoarchaeology.org. Tonight, as usual, we will be using the Q&A feature. You can find it on your Zoom control panel, and feel free to submit questions at any time. They will be answered at the end of the presentation during our moderated Q&A. So I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Jon Spenard tonight. He is an assistant professor of anthropology at California State University, San Marcos. In 2018, he started his Rio Frio Regional Archaeological Project, the first long-term study of the mountain pine ridge in Belize. The initial focus of that project was several cave sites in the Rio Frio Valley that were documented 90 years earlier but not studied since. The scope of the project has expanded to a broader study of the many ways past Maya people interacted and lived in a landscape unique to the Maya lowlands. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Jon.
All right, Dante, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to everybody who has made it out tonight. I know we have some folks from Belize and from some other countries visiting near and far. So I do appreciate you coming out tonight. And just trying to get my screen shared here. And okay, are we good?
Yes, you're good, Jon.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks again, Dante. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the ancient Maya of the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve in Belize. And just to get us all geographically situated, because folks might not know where exactly this is, here is a map of the Maya region. And I'm going to be talking quite a bit about geography tonight. So I just want to give us a really quick overview of this area before we get started, get into too much depth here. This is a map of the Maya region, and got kind of three distinct geographic zones here. I'm not going to get into all the difference of them, but we have mountainous volcanic highlands down south into from Chiapas, Mexico through southern Guatemala. And then the center area here, this is the area of commonly considered to be the classic Maya civilization, where the classic Maya were. There's a lot of rivers and it's a very wet tropical environment. The highlands are very humid and very temperate. And then up here in the northern Yucatan, it is all the rivers are flowing underwater. So it's one of the ways that this is defined. In these two areas up north here, this is largely limestone bedrock. And so this is going to be an important part of the talk, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. Down here in the highlands, it's metamorphic rock, but that's all the geography I'll talk about for this whole area. Now I just want to zoom in a little bit and see, we'll talk about it. Here's Belize. Here's a map of a satellite image of Belize. And then this area right here is the area that we're going to be talking about tonight. This has a very distinct geography and geology, and that plays an important part of the research that I've been doing up here. But just to situate us a bit more too, just north of us are the sites of the Belize Valley, and I'll talk with you all about some of those in just a few minutes here. And then to the west of this area is the Vaca Plateau. Both of these areas have been investigated for decades. The Belize Valley has been investigated pretty much continuously since the 1950s or so. And there's even some archaeological work going back there to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The Vaca Plateau has had several decades of continual research there as well. But this area is, the area that I'm working in now has largely been unstudied. And again, I'll talk to you all about that in a few minutes. But this does, you can see it does stand out as a distinct region on the landscape. And it was distinct for a variety of reasons. Just a quick chronological overview of the Maya. We'll look pre-classic periods when we see the first cities or the first villages and become cities from 1000 BC to about 250 CE. The classic period is the what people tend to think of when they think about the ancient Maya. Post-classic period is the period following the collapse, where we see a lot more activity up north in the Yucatan. And then the Maya cities were continually in the north, especially were continually inhabited through the Spanish arrival of the Spanish, and that starts the colonial period. But our focus tonight is going to be primarily on the classic period. Right? So we're looking at the years from the years about 250 to 900 or so, give or take 100 years on either side. Now, when we look at the geography of the lowlands, I just mentioned this, but I want to show some examples of this. The Maya lowlands in the central area, in that northern area, is when we think of this, we think of this as this region is covered in jungle and broadleaf tropical forest, and certainly it is. We get forest that looks like this, gently rolling landscape. Because it's limestone, we get a lot of cave formation in here too, and I've talked to the center. I've talked about this recently or previously. Some of these caves are enormous, like this one. This is Rio Frio Cave C. We'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. And some of these some of these caves can be really small. But the lowlands is again where we see classic Maya civilization, classic Maya cities. So cities like Tikal were built in this environment. And this is just a view of Tikal today, again, just to show what the environment looks like here. We see these gently rolling hills, very thick broadleaf tropical forest. Okay. Moving into the Belize Valley, we have sites like Nohojpatso. Again, you can kind of see what the trees look like here, and this is actually in the middle of town. But even still, we have kind of thick vegetation here. Actually, Nohojpatso is one of the earliest Maya settlements known. It was settled probably somewhere around 1100 or so BC. So one of the earliest Maya settlements known. Right? Also in the Belize Valley, during the late classic period, the site of Chinantzinich became a dominant center. And you can see here's a couple people for scale. Here's somebody walking up to this pyramid. Another person here. Two folks are doing some maintenance on the structure. The Castillo. The Castillo Chinantzinich is that building we're just looking at has this well-known Eastern frieze that shows us being depicted as a living, breathing mountain. But again, just to look at the landscape here, we see gently rolling hills, dense forest, broadleaf forest. The site of Caracol is the dominant site on the Vaca Plateau. And again, you can see another massive pyramid here. These sites are bigger than these structures, but these are kind of the dominant structures at these sites. And again, we see people here and some more folks up top here. But again, pay attention to the vegetation surrounding these places. Certainly this vegetation would not have been this thick in these places during when these cities were inhabited. They would have been there'd been farmland around them, but there were orchards in there as well. So we get a variety of vegetation here. And I do want to spend a minute to talk about Caracol in a little bit more depth, because this site is pretty close to where I'm doing my research at. And so I'll talk a little bit about the archaeology of Caracol, simply because it helps to situate the research that I'm doing, and the importance of this site to this broad region. So here's these yellow areas here on this map are population centers. But what we see with Caracol is that they built an extensive dendritic road network that connected all these various peripheral communities to it. And you notice the scale down here, right, 4 kilometers. Some of these road networks go 16, 20 kilometers distant from the center of the site. And these two centers up here, these two nodes of the road network actually come pretty close to the boundaries of the mountain pine ridge itself. And so Caracol's presence was there. Caracol was close to the mountain pine ridge. And so questions about control come into play when we talk about this site and who's controlling the resources that were up here. But Caracol was, as we can see here, this is a LiDAR image that was published from the site. And what we see here is that this was actually a very heavily manufactured landscape. We see lots of agricultural terracing. All these lines on this image is agricultural terraces. So this, at the time, this wasn't actually, when Caracol was inhabited during the Classic period, this was not a very heavily forested environment, but it was actually a farmed environment. But in between these areas of farms would be areas of again, tropical forest, broadleaf tropical forest. All right, so taking a look at the satellite imagery of the mountain pine ridge, what you're looking at here is the mountain pine ridge is largely delineated by this blue line, which is the McCall River right here. And then this purple line right here is the Provacion Creek. What we can see outside of that is a lot of dark green vegetation. And that's the broadleaf forest that I've just been talking about. And that's all more or less underlain by limestone. And that's primarily what we see throughout the Maya lowlands, is this kind of geography, this kind of underlying bedrock and this kind of vegetation. But this reddish brown here that we see that's outlined by the McCall River is the mountain pine ridge. And this is actually underlain by granite. So you can see a ridge line running up right here. This is actually a fault line. And to the west of it is primarily granite outcropping, and to the east of it is sedimentary rock and slightly metamorphosized rock. The environment up here is very different from what we see elsewhere in the Maya region. And that largely has to do with that underlying geology. The granite produces very acidic soils. That's not good for the broadleaf forest to grow, but it's really conducive to pine trees. And so this is actually a pine savanna ecosystem up here. We get much of the same similar animals that we see in the broadleaf forest, but it's primarily, it's just a different vegetation. It's also a very dynamic landscape. Because of the granite, we get a lot of streams and creeks that drain off the pine ridge into the McCall. And so you get this sense when I'm down there that this is almost not Belize. It looks like something I would see maybe in Central California rather than being in the tropics, even though the heat certainly reminds me that I'm there. So we get these really dynamic landscapes filled with waterfalls, granitic waterfalls. Some of these are impressively high. This is Big Rock Falls here, and you might be able to see there's a person right down here. And we get some really interesting natural geologic formations up here. This is just not a product of natural weathering. This is not actually a carved monument. Okay. Now, when we talk about the archaeological perceptions of the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve, what we see is this idea that the Maya were not there. A land survey team by the British Crown came to Belize and did a land survey in the 1950s. And what they said of the Mountain Pine Ridge is that it seems clear that neither the ancient Maya nor the modern Maya have practiced agriculture on the poor soils in the Mountain Pine Ridge. In other words, the Maya didn't live there. More recently, David Pendergast writes that there are no recorded surface sites in the immediate vicinity of the Rio Frio caves. And those are sites I'll talk about in a minute. Those are in the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve. The presence of a source of potable water near the cave might have made it attractive for habitation, but the soils in the area are generally skeletal. And even more recently than that, in 2005, David Lentz and colleagues write that the acidic soils in the Mountain Pine Ridge, highly weathered and derived largely from granite bedrock, are unsuitable for agriculture, accounting for the low density of pre-Columbian and modern habitation. So what we see is that going back to the 1950s, right? That there's this concept that the Maya were not present on the mountain pine ridge. And in fact, if we look at a map of where we find ancient Maya settlements, we see that the mountain pine ridge is a void. Right? So these up here from Shenandoah, Nohojpatso, Lower Dover, Black Manetti, Baking Pot, these are the sites of the Belize Valley. And over here, Minanha, Yashno, East Chell, Caracol are the sites of the Vaca Plateau. Right? So what we see, we get this sense is that the Maya, right, there's no Maya presence up here. Right? But what I want to point out in this satellite image is if we actually look at this area that's circled, we do see that same kind of dark green vegetation over here. And this is actually a series of limestone, basically limestone islands that were cut off from the Vaca Plateau as the McCall River cut through. And so we actually do get over here that same kind of lowland limestone broadleaf forested environment over in this area where we typically find Maya settlements elsewhere in the lowlands. Right? But because of the lack of documented sites here, there hasn't been much research done up here. Right? Again, this has been seen as somewhat of an area void of the ancient Maya presence. Also, too, it's a pretty remote part of the country, and it's been really difficult to get to, and so it's much easier to study in some other places. So folks haven't spent much time up here. So what I want to do now is give you a comprehensive overview of the entirety of the Maya research, ancient Maya research done in the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve, keeping in mind that what we're including in the Forest Reserve does include this area over here of limestone forest, limestone bedrock. So the very first archaeological project in the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve was, before it was a reserve, was by Gregory Mason in 1928, who was hired by the High Foundation Museum of the American Indian in New York to travel to the Maya area to collect ethnographic objects to add to the collection of that museum. When he got to Belize, when he got into Cayo, he had heard about some caves that were pretty remote, and he went out there to study them, and he found the caves, what he called A, B, and C. And he'd made some collections there, and they haven't actually been studied since, the caves or the collections. About a decade later, notable Mayanist J. Eric S. Thompson came into the area looking for what he called pre-Maya habitation on the Mountain Pine Ridge. Essentially, he was looking for what we would now call Archaic period or Paleo-Indian presence up there. The Mountain Pine Ridge is really good for hunting, and he figured that maybe some early hunters might be up there. He wasn't very successful, and he published about just maybe a paragraph on this, but he did find a few stone cairns that had some artifacts associated with them, but nothing that he could date, but he suspected they were ancient Maya. 20 years later, in 1958, Archaeological Commissioner Hamilton Anderson had heard about some active pot hunting in the Rio Frio area, and he went out to investigate. And he documented 2 more caves, and he just used the naming conventions that Mason did, calling them caves D and E. I just want to point out here, there's somebody standing down here in front of this picture, and I think there's another person right here, just to give you a sense of scale here. Unfortunately, Hamilton Anderson passed away before he could publish his work, and then soon after, Belize was struck by Hurricane Hattie, which wound up flooding the offices of where the archaeological materials were held. Many of his notes were destroyed, and just a little bit of the collection actually survived. Luckily, David Pendergast had gone with him on one of the trips to the caves, and he was able to publish was basically a ceramic monograph on the archaeology that was done there. But much of the work was lost, and they weren't actually anticipating on doing much research when they first found the cave, when they first documented the cave. But they found an intact deposit that they excavated by hand to keep the materials out of hands of looters. Just a few years later, William Bulliard, who was at the time working in the Belize Valley, came up to the Pine Ridge and documented what he called the unique Maya shrine site. It's essentially a granite structure that might be some kind of a shrine. He did a little bit of work, not much excavation there. He kind of looked around for some artifacts. Again, like Thompson, didn't find much in the way of datable material, but it was a Maya shrine. And as he said, it's unique. And so far, nobody else has documented anything like this up there before, even though several people have gone out to try and find this or find similar ones. We haven't been able to relocate it. And that was it until the turn of the millennium, when Dr. Holly Moyes and Dr. Jaime Awe started their Belize Regional Caves project that ran from 2011 to 2016. And this was actually a countrywide project where they were documenting several caves throughout Belize. And they documented a few caves in the general Rio Frio region. And then lastly, I want to mention here, most recently, before I started my project up here, a geology PhD student now has her PhD, Dr. Tani Tibbetts, came up to this area and did some geochemical sampling of granite outcrops here in the Mountain Pine Ridge. And the only two others known in the Maya lowlands, they're also both in Belize, both on the outsides of the Maya mountains. She did this geochemical study with portable X-ray fluorescence to try and locate to try and source the bedrock that groundstone tools were being made out of, granite groundstone tools were being made out of. And I'll talk more about that research later on. So that's it. Over almost a century now, we have 6 archaeological projects, and just maybe a few months of research in total between all of them over the last century. In 2018, I started my Rio Frio Regional Archaeological project there, the RiFRAP, and my intention was to study the caves, to study the Rio Frio caves, to learn more about them. Mason didn't publish very much on them. He just published a short 40-page monograph that's the size of a 3x5 index card. And there was no maps in it. There's some photos and descriptions of some of the vessels that he took out, but basically it was not, it's not published to contemporary standards. And so we don't know much about, don't know much about the caves. And so I wanted to learn more about them. So I started my project down there. The foundational questions of that project was, when and why were the Rio Frio caves being used? Right, these are just very basic questions that we ask of any archaeological site when we first start working there. The other question was, who were the people using the caves? There's one of two options. And the first one seemed more likely. The first is that they were long-distance pilgrims. And I'll talk about why in just a minute here. But the second was that there was maybe some heretofore unknown local populations that might have been using them, or maybe it's a combination of both. But regardless, when I started the project, we didn't know of any sites in the region. And so this was trying to learn who the people were using the caves. So my project started we focused on caves A and C. Cave B is really small, and there's not much in the way of artifacts there. Mason didn't actually even recover much from there. So our focus is on caves A and C, and both of these are tourist caves. Cave C is also known as Rio Frio Cave. It's a popular tourist destination, and people go there daily on their way to Caracol, usually back on the way from the way to Caracol. Cave A is also accessible. It's just off the road up a small hill, about 200 meters up the hill. So these had roads going right to them, and these were the easiest to start with, and so this is where we started. So we've mapped both caves. We've mapped cave C, and we started excavations in cave A. But going back to Mason's work, I'll talk about my results there in a minute. But going back to Mason's work, this is what these were a few of the images that he published of the ceramics that he recovered. And what we now know, he didn't know at the time. He wasn't even convinced that what he found was evidence of the Maya. He thought that might have been somebody else. But what we now know is that these ceramics primarily date to the late to terminal classic period. And I want to point out these two kinds of vessels here on the left. This is a spiked ceramic censer. Okay? And then these three sherds here are actually pieces of other kinds of vessels that we know from this area. that were basically applique faces. Right? And we find these kinds of vessels are common with sites in the south, right? Particularly Caracol, and we see there's some connections with sites in with the Petén region in general. Okay? So we get cultural affiliations with the south. On the other hand, Pendergast, with doing the ceramic analysis of Cave C, what he found is that there's several early classic period kinds of vessels, style vessels, so that these are over here on the bottom right. And then other early through terminal classic period vessels. I don't have the terminal classic period ones noted here or shown here, but basically have evidence of the entire classic period use of this cave. But what's interesting is that many of the vessels that I'm showing here are more common to the Belize Valley. Right? So again, with this research, when I started this project, there were the caves suggested both connections with the Belize Valley and connections with Caracol. So who were using the caves? Maybe these were long distance pilgrims coming up from sites from those regions to perform rituals here, or again, maybe there was a local population. Now, our excavations in Cave A. Here's a couple of my team from 2019. It's Andres on the left, Jessica and Javi on the right. What we found is that the ceramics confirm a late terminal classic period use of the caves of Cave A. But the ceramics actually suggest ties to the Belize Valley and Caracol. So we do see, we didn't really clarify that picture of who was using the caves. Questions are for what purpose, why people were using these caves. We do have a little bit clearer idea, but I do want to say that what we find are evidence of particular areas of the cave being used for particular purposes. We can't say that this is evidence that we're finding is of the entire cave being used for this purpose. Okay? So using particular areas of caves for particular rituals. So in our investigations, what we found is in both the units that we placed in the entrance of Cave A, we found extensive lenses, several lenses, stacked very thin lenses of ash deposits, suggesting that there's repeated burning activities here, successive year after year after year after year. And in those, we actually found immature corn cobs, fragments of immature corn cobs. We haven't dated these yet, but these kinds of offerings are not uncommon in caves in Belize. We typically do find, and elsewhere, we typically do find immature fruits of plants deposited in caves, and these have been interpreted as what's been called first fruit ceremonies. In other words, in agricultural societies, typically within agricultural societies where they believe in, where there's a belief in some kind of a supernatural force or a god that owns the land, or some kind of supernatural being that owns the land, these are given as a way of saying thank you for the successful harvest, to thank you for that spirit or that force for allowing the farm, allowing the growing of the crops and for the successful harvest. And so it looks like that Cave A, this part of Cave A, was actually being used for that, for first fruit ceremonies. And the lensing and the ashes and you can't see it here, this just looks like one big deposit, but there's perhaps upwards of a dozen here. That suggests that they were continually coming back to this area to perform these rituals. We've also identified some theatrical component of ritual performance here in the caves. Maya rituals were very theatrical celebrations. On stele and monuments, we see rulers decorated in costumes, very elaborate costumes. And we know that a lot of incense was burned, and these were theatrical productions. And we get a sense of that here. This is a photo of a 3D model that we made of a formation inside of Cave A. And here you notice that there's a hole right here in this formation. This is natural, except there's some regrowth here. These would have, in the past, these were connected, and the ancient Maya knocked them out. And we know that the ancient Maya, because of that regrowth there. So they've shaped this to look this way, right? To have this gaping hole right here. Now, interestingly, all around the foundation of this formation, we found a bunch of charcoal in natural pits in the cave, as well as just kind of all over this floor. So they were burning fires up here. And this is actually up above about 30 feet up above a chamber down below that you can see from up here. And so what seems to have happened, what I think happened, is that they were using this as a way to show the physical manifestation of whatever spiritual essence they were trying to conjure in their rituals up here. So they're lighting fires here. And now imagine this is with a flashlight. With a fire, this ma would have been jumping off at the dancing on the wall as the fire's flickering. So we're understanding some of the theatrical component of the ritual performance here. We have also gone to relocate Rio Frio Cave E. We've tried for a few years to go find this cave. Most recently was 2019. And again, I want to point out that here are these two individuals standing down in the entrance of this cave, just to give you a sense of scale. So we've gone out into those broadleaf tropical forests to try and find the cave. We have a vague description from Pendergast that it's 2 miles from the government facility nearby. And that's it. This is pre-GPS days, so we don't know exactly where it is. But we did recon, we found caves, but these are not the caves we were looking for. Right? These are not the caves we were looking for. You can see here that these were much more diminutive. Still evidence of being used, but not Cave E. But this actually turned out to be a fateful day, this trip in 2019, because as we were chopping through, as we were going through the bush here, we actually did wind up finding some settlement in the Rio Frio Valley. So this is what we were going through that day to try and find the cave. This is actually the trail right here. And we did come across a small group of households on top of a hill. And now I had expected to find something like this out there. This is the right kind of environment for it. Some low density rural, very rural population, and this seemed to fit my expectations. So we went down the other side of this hill and we documented this, we mapped it, and then went down the other side of the hill to try and continue to find the cave. And at the floor of the valley, we actually found this structure here. And at that point of the day, we had been going for several hours. We were out of water. I had given up. I'd reluctantly taken my bag off to take this picture because it was more evidence of settlement. And as I was taking this picture, Javi ran off one way and Mike here ran off the other way. And as I'm taking this picture, I hear Javi start calling out, "It's John, oh, John, come here, John, oh." And so I gathered my energy and went to find him. And you can't see him here, but here he is. Up here, he's standing on top of a 25-foot tall pyramid that we had no idea was there. This is actually right on the other side. He was a bit muffled, and why he was a bit muffled is that there's actually what appeared to be about a 12-foot tall wall between him and I. And I came over and he's standing in front of this pyramid. You can't see it here because it's really hard to get pictures of structures in the broadleaf forest here. But as I'm collecting myself, I hear Mike also from somewhere else in the forest yelling that we have a something, and I couldn't hear him. And so finally, Javi and I tracked him down. And what he had told me is that he had found a stela, a Maya monument. Clearly not a cave, but certainly not what we're expecting to find that day either. And we had stumbled into an undocumented Maya town or city that we called the Nohojpatso. And so I want to spend a few minutes now introducing you to Nohojpatso, just the second settlement and now the first investigated Maya site in the Mountain Pine Ridge, a Maya settlement in the Mountain Pine Ridge. It's actually located in the valley between Rio Frio Caves C and E. So it's right next to the cave. So it seems like we've identified who is using the caves. Okay. So this is the totality of the site that we know about as of this summer, and the work that we did there this past summer. So zooming in a little bit, the site core. It's primarily aligned east to west, right? And this is Plaza 1 here, and what we call Plaza 3 are the main plazas of the site. They're definitely aligned. This was the structure that had been looted that I was taking a picture of, and this was the wall, what I thought was a wall that Javi was standing behind, and he was right here. So we get this primary east-west alignment. This is not sure of the relationship yet between the plazas here, but this is not aligned with these other ones. And then there's this really distinct structure down here. It's a couple of range structures that are on the hillside that have some terraces and possibly stairs leading up to them. So we had east-west primary alignment, 3 or 4 plazas, 25 to 30 structures. The made pyramid's about 8 meters tall. We haven't actually measured it yet. We have this hillside range structure complex down here that I just mentioned. And we actually know that now that there's 2 stela, they were probably paired with one another, and they were snapped in antiquity, which tells us something about when the site ended, or when the site was abandoned, or when people left the site. What's also exciting about the site is that it's largely intact. There's very little pot hunting activity here. There's only about 4 to 5 looter trenches that we've recorded in the entire site. One of them here in this structure here, and then the other one of the others here. And there's just a few minor ones. Mostly everything else is intact. So our work we got back, this is 2019. And then of course, COVID shut us down for 2 years, which was two of the most painful years of my life, because I had made, my team and I had made this find of a career. Really, we had to wait a couple of years to investigate, but we got back there this summer. And my interest here, because this was completely undocumented before, we wanted to map the site, which we did, and I wanted to collect some chronological information about it too. So our focus was going to be in Plaza 1, and that's this plaza up here. There was this was the most substantial looter's trench, pot hunter's trench that we've documented yet in this site, and you can see it here. It penetrated pretty deep into the structure, and so my interest here was to fix this. So we screened the back dirt and actually refilled the trench to prevent, or to preserve it. And we also we used the opportunity though, because it was looted, to get an idea of the building construction, the building history of the site. When the ancient Maya built their cities, when they built their towns, they didn't build like we do today. We like to clear cut. We like to destroy everything that was there before. The Maya, when they built, they built things, they used what was there before to make things bigger. And so oftentimes with a temple or something like that, they just knock off the very top of it and then fill in everything around it and then build a bigger structure on top of that. So essentially their buildings are a series of onions, right? They're structured kind of like onions on top of one another. So by these looter activities, we can get a sense of how many construction phases there are and how many times these buildings have been expanded over their lifetime. So what we've identified here is we have 3 major construction phases at the site, in this structure. Sorry, not the site, in the structure. One here, which is the earliest that was seen in the looter's trench profile. Possibly another one right here, and then the third one being here, the terminal phase architecture. And in here, we have some small scale renovations and additions to the structure. We don't really understand it yet. We still have a lot of work to do here, as this was just cleaning the looter's trench. But it seems like there was at least one minor addition or a couple minor renovations made to the structure before another major construction event made the building much bigger. Now, I'm going back in January to actually look at the artifacts that we recovered here more comprehensively. But one of the things that struck me as we were cleaning the looter's trench is that we were finding a lot of applique ceramics, the same kinds of ceramics that Mason recovered from the Rio Frio caves. So we've got a couple here that are applique. This one's appliqued. Again, that's just taking, forming a clay body, forming the vessel, and putting, basically sculpting other clay onto it. Right? And then this here is actually a nose, and it has 2 bulbous pendants on either side of it, basically nose plugs. This is a common form, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. We also documented and excavated Stela 1. And so this is it cleaned out. Stela 1 is the one that we found that day. And we actually just moved the top of the stela off to the side so we can excavate. So this is the standing butt of it. And then this is the actual top of the monument right here. One of the things I do on my project is 3D documentation. And I'm going to try and get this to work. There we go. We do a lot of photogrammetry and recording of monuments and artifacts and things to study them from home. This is just a video of the 3D model that we made of the stela to give you a sense of what it looked like before we started excavating. And these bars here are they're scale bars that we use just to map the whatever it is that we're photographing. So here we're kind of standing on the building, looking down onto what was essentially the last plaza floor here. So the stela is right up against the front of the building, and then the top of the stela was on the floor, the plaza floor. This is the profile of our unit trench, of our excavation unit, and we found is evidence of 3 floors actually. 2 of them were not plastered. The Maya plazas were plastered typically, but oftentimes the ones that are closest to the surface erode, and that's what we saw here. But we did see evidence of 2 floors, and then where we actually wound up ending the season, we found a partially intact plaster floor. So we have 3 floors here, 3 plaza floors, and the stela does actually continue. I didn't draw it in here, but the stela does continue below this floor here. So I suspect that the stela is associated with this plastering event and dates to that time period, which we don't know what it is yet. Just in terms of the excavations, this is just before we hit the plaster floor, but we did find a soft spot here in the front of the stela, right in the center line of it. And we do know that the ancient Maya and other Mesoamerican people would actually erect these large posts in front of monuments to hang flags and banners. And so it's possible what we're seeing here is evidence of this is a post hole, perhaps, that a banner or a flag would have been hung on in the past for rituals. And perhaps the funnest field discovery this season was after we pulled the top of the monument off and dug down through the root cap here. We actually found this small little vessel here, which would have been right up against next to the stela. The stela would have been laying right here. So this is actually placed here after the stela was snapped, and probably some kind of dedicatory cache, perhaps somebody who lived here before coming back after the site was abandoned. Now, we also did make some discoveries in the screen, which is not uncommon for archaeology, but what I want to mention is that we actually made a discovery setting up our screening station. As we were looking around to put these posts in the ground, we were poking around in different areas, and we saw a rock that was similar to the kinds of rock that the stela was made from. And we started to uncover that rock, and it just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger until we uncovered the second stela, which is Nohojpatso stela 2. And this is Franklin admiring the stela just after we uncovered it. So now we have 2 monuments at this site. Just to give you a quick side-by-side comparison, stela 1 is pointed and tapered. Stela 2 is squared with parallel sides. They're both made out of phyllite, which is a slightly metamorphosized slate. And this is found in the region. Most Maya stela are carved out of limestone, but slate and phyllite stela are fairly uncommon, but they're known to this area because the material is available here. Stela 1 is definitely uncarved. We flipped it and checked. Stela 2, we didn't actually flip that one, partially because this damage right here, which was already done, the steel is really fragile here. If we tried to flip it, we're afraid that it's going to break, and so we don't want to do that. So we're probably never going to flip it. or if we'll dig a small trench underneath it and send a small camera or robot or something like that under there to see if we can see any carving, but it doesn't appear to be carved. Both stood about 2 meters tall, their height, and they're about the same average thickness or average width. Now, what's interesting about them is the placement of where they are. So this was Stela 1 right here, and I've added this shape to structure 1, simply because I think there's a staircase here, and Stela 2 is here. And it's unusual for Maya to have just put stela on the sides of sides of structures. And so I think there's probably going to be other stela here, and that these are just flanking stela for other monuments that are going to be found in future seasons here. So taking a step back, going back to the sort of the main part of the plaza here, the main part of the site. Again, I want to point out this is where our stela excavation was, and this is the extent of excavations so far at Nohoch Batsó. So needless to say, we don't know very much about the site. We have a lot more work to do up here. But to give you some very preliminary results of our season, focused on mapping and looter trench cleaning when we can get to the site, and that's an important part. I have a little bit more to talk about still. Very little excavation and primary contacts and lab works to get underway. But we do get 3 phases of construction revealed in the Stela 1 looters trench, as well as the Stela excavation. Discovery of Stela 2, opposite side of the staircase of Stela 1, does suggest that there's other stela there, other monuments there. Generally speaking, again, we still have to go and do the work to study the ceramics, but it looks like what we're finding are early classic to possibly early post-classic period ceramics. So generously dating the site right now from about 400 to about 1100, very, very tentatively, and kind of generous with the interpretations there. But what I do know is that we have a very strong late classic, terminal classic period component of the site, which means the geographic proximity and shared ceramic types of the cave assemblages does suggest that these were people using the caves, who were using the caves. So future research questions for Nohojpatso is, with so little excavation done and so little survey done, what is this complete site chronology? We have several other complexes that we need to investigate still. Are other more architecturally complex parts of the site older than Plaza 1, or are they all the same age? Another question is, how far does the core and hinterland settlement extend? Local knowledge does suggest that there's some mounds on the other broadly forested areas of the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve, including on the other side of the Rio Frio. So does the site core extend that far, or are those mountains part of a different site, perhaps? If we find more dispersed rural settlement, are they affiliated with Nohojpatso? Who are they? Are they culturally affiliated with anybody? Or are they just a rural population? And what are they doing out there? All right. That sounded like a conclusion, but wait, there is more, because I have more to talk about. It turns out that the Mountain Pine Ridge is not quite as vacant as believed. We also have spent some time working in the Pine Ridge proper, right, where we see the pine and grassland, the granitic underlying areas. And some of the foundational research questions there is, what is the ancient Maya presence on the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve? We do know, and archaeologists have long talked about the economic importance of the resources that are found here that are they're fairly unique to this area. Granite, slate, other metamorphic rocks, metamorphic rock, pine. This is a really good hunting area, right? How are those getting harvested from there? By who and how, right? There's been arguments made that there's direct from creeks and riverbeds that are flowing off the Mountain Pine Ridge, or perhaps they're being harvested directly from parent sources. But for the most part, our survey up here has been what I would call opportunistic. It is a very long drive, and sometimes we need to take a break. And when we need to take a break, everybody jumps out of the van and goes and runs and looks around on the grass for a few minutes and sees what we can find. And if we find anything, we document it, we map it and document it, and then get back in the van and continue on to the caves or to Nohojpatso. And for the most part, we've found sites up there, but they're primarily low density lithic scatters, which is very exciting if you're working with a team of California archaeologists like I do. We get a lot of, some of these low density lithic scatter sites are 1, 2 flakes, 3 flakes, right? So we get isolates and sites. but we very studiously map in the exact location of each one using GPS and GNSS devices. We don't find these lithic scatters everywhere. They tend to be on the elevated ridge tops, and so there is some patterning to use that we've seen. Again, we haven't done very much systematic survey up here, but we do know that there seems to be a pattern emerging when we do the research up here. We don't have any way of dating these yet. These could be very old. They could be sort of Paleo-Indian, archaic period. They could also be classic Maya. They could be later. We don't really know. They could even be more modern, more contemporary. We don't know. However, Dr. Liz Graham who's worked in this area of Belize and Belize for a long time has found these in southern Belize, and she suggested that these are actually used to down there to chop down the grass, which is then burned, which then attracts deer. And so what we actually be seeing here is evidence of some hunting strategies being used to attract deer to these particular areas, to create the kind of vegetation that the deer would like to eat to make them easier to hunt. So that's just one possibility. But we're going to continue to identify low density lithic scatters. But I will say that I did not keep you extra long to talk about low density lithic scatters. I mentioned before about the issues of getting to the site, getting to Nohojpatso. This is a microcosm of our 2022 field season. It rained a lot. They're paving the road through the mountain pine ridge right now. And there's a lot of construction activity, which again is familiar to California archaeologists. I took this picture because you see the cones up here. There's a drop of about 10 feet from this part of the road to that part of the road. We had to wait about 20 minutes for them to build the ramp down because the road just ended in front of us. And then it was also very muddy, and I had a van that didn't have very good tires, and we wound up getting stuck. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. I thought I had my phone turned off. We did get stuck in the mud, but we didn't take this as a lost day. We couldn't get to Nohojpatso to work. We took this as an opportunity to do some more opportunistic survey. And so we jumped out of the van and we started surveying. And Javi, who I've been working with for a very long time now, Javi Mayan, here's his brother Antonio, know this land more than anybody else. And I often say, and I've said for years, I've never discovered anything. Javi and his brother Antonio and the crews that I work with down there, they know this landscape. They know these sites. They bring me there, and I get to document them. And so this work is not possible without them, and they're very integral parts of components of this project. So when we got out of the van, Javi said he had done some work over here years before doing a tree replanting project. So as we're looking for lithic scatters, he says, "Hey, you guys can document your lithic scatters. I know there's some sites over here." He's pointing over there. And he said, I'm going to go find them, and then I'll bring you to them, and you guys can keep looking at your lithic scatters. And so he came back about 20 minutes later, and he said he's found 7 of the mounds. And so we went and checked him out. And what he brought me up to was this. This pick is ours. And what you're seeing here is a somewhat freshly looted granite gravel pit, gravel quarry. This is an ancient Maya granite quarry and groundstone production locus here. And this is everything you're seeing here is chips of percussed granite used to make manos and metates. This is just one of about 7 that we've documented here. And this is, I know this is freshly looted. There's a 2-track that goes right up to this, and somebody's been up here quarrying this for whatever. It's not the road crew. This is old, but all this grassy area here, all the trees growing out here, all that is covering extensive deposits of this granite debitage. These the bedrock that was being quarried does look like buffaloes from the other side of the hill. So we named this the Buffalo Hill Granitic Quarries site. And this is the extent of the site that we've mapped to date. What you were just looking at was this area right here. These do continue. We've mapped so far an area of about 11 hectares, which is roughly the size of my campus, what I just learned tonight. So this is a huge area, and we had to continue our work at Nohoch Batsó. The site does continue, so we haven't mapped all of it yet. And what you were looking at is one of the smaller areas. These are all, these are activity areas where we see quarrying or some kind of extraction and production. And we know it's ancient Maya because we have found ceramics there. Unfortunately, though, they're very highly weathered because of the acidic soil, assuming with the acidic soil, the Pine Ridge. And so there's no decoration on those slips or paints or anything like that on them remain. They're very, very rough shaped. The surfaces are also eroded. So we're going to have a hard time. I think we're going to have a hard time dating this site, but this does point to ancient Maya. So I just want to walk you through really quickly in the bit of time I have left to talk about some of the different components of this site and actually the importance of it, because it turns out that this site is probably more significant than Nohoch Batsó in terms of the mountain pine ridge and the archaeology here. So we have a couple different types of collecting the material. We have quarry pits, which we've identified as various sizes and depth, and surrounding these, so we have these debitaged piles, right? But around the base of the pits are actually free of debitage. So it's like they're quarrying down and then throwing the debris over their shoulders. We do see some isolated cut faces, and these are typically smaller scale, but these features like this that are being percussed. And flakes are being knocked off, and those are being shaped into manos and metates. And you see here, right, we have granite debitage everywhere, found near modified boulders, bedrock, low mounds, beams, berms. In some places, we've measured them up to be about 1.5 meters tall from the surface, but we haven't excavated these. We've just documented these. We don't know how deep these deposits actually go. They can be much more extensive than that. Here's an example of a quarry pit. Here we have Moshi here and Hobbies over here. They're standing on either side of a quarry pit, and this down here in the center here is the pit, and I'm standing on the ground surface on the outside of this. And so this is standing up about 1.5 meters tall here, so of debitage. And it is debitage. These are percussed flakes of various sizes. And of some really big flakes I'll show you in a minute, and some smaller flakes. But these have standard, your sort of standard flake patterns on them. We get bowls of percussion, we get striking platforms, we see all that kinds of evidence of this. So they're doing percussion shaping of these tools, of these objects. We found in some cases clusters of hammerstones, often made out of quartzite. Some of them are just sort of mixed haphazardly through the granite debitage, and or in this case, we see they're clustered together, perhaps indicating an activity area or at least a place where people are putting their tools at the end of the day. And the hammerstones are all various shapes and sizes. Some are quartzite, some are actually granite. We haven't documented the material types of all these, but this one was the biggest that we found. This is a small two-handed boulder that would have been used to percuss, probably take the initial flakes off the granite outcrops. We also get, we know that they're making manos up here, so the handheld grinding stones. So they're in various stages of reduction, and in some cases really hard to discern raw rock from a mano. So we get some more formed reduced pieces like this. And some of these, like this one, is still really rough. It hasn't been sharpened at all, at all. This one, I'll talk about this more in a minute. So this might be a mano. This might be a production tool, and I'll tell you why that I think that is in just a minute here. Here's again some more quarrying and production tools. You get another quartzite hammerstone here. This is I think we probably marked this as a preform, but I've done a little bit more research since, and I think this is a production tool. And we get some it's again another example here. Now, in the 1980s, Brian Hayden, an ethnoarchaeologist, Brian Hayden, went into the Guatemalan highlands to study, to work with a community of workers who made manos and metates out of basalt. And he found out that there is somebody in that community who still used just stone tools to make manos and metates. And so he did an extensive he did a several years project working with this community and brought a bunch of grad students up there, and they published a book on this. He did a really extensive documentation of this, and what he's actually shown, I'm showing two pictures here of some of these hammerstones that they're using, that he uses to make the manos, or the metates, sorry, the basins, right? The metate basins. So notice both of these here, right? They're picks. They have pointed edges on them. They're made out of the same local material. They're made out of the same basalt that's being found in the area. And so I suspect that these here, what we're seeing, might not be preformed. Some of these ones that points on them may have been used for this one especially may have been used as picks to actually make the grinding stones. But that's just a post-field observation. We have a lot more study on these to do. They're all still in the field. So we got to go back and collect them and do some more microscopic analysis of them to see if we can identify if they're picks, production tools, reduction tools, or if they're actually preforms. We also have found a few metate preforms, and again we see some pecking and shaping of them. But this is, right, they're knocking off these percussed flakes, and they're using the natural curvature of the percussed flake to create the bowl of the metate. Okay. And this one is one that was formed, and it was possibly likely broken in the past, which is why it was abandoned, but it is kind of near finished stage production. We've also identified a few bedrock milling features. And as a team of California archaeologists, these were really perplexing to us. These are shallow ovoid to circular basins cut into the bedrock outcrops, and this is a 3D picture of a 3D model of one of the bedrock milling features, and actually goes down about 10 centimeters or so. Here in California, this would be evidence of food production, and I was initially thought that that's what we might be seeing, that quarry workers are coming here maybe to prepare their corn to make masa with. But then after I got back, I was reading through Hayden's ethnohistory of the metate producers down in Guatemala, and I came across this image. So here's another one of the bedrock milling features. But I came across this image, and he doesn't talk about this, what's happening outside of that. This is using a pick to sharpen a mano, but I noticed that they created almost what looks like to be a nest. They piled up some debris, or maybe this is through the production process. The pointed end of the mano is actually in the ground, and it's being held up partially by the ground. And I suspect, and again, we're going to have to test this, but I suspect that that's what these bedrock milling features actually are. Is they're probably holding the tips of the manos as they're being sharpened to produce them. But again, that's just speculation. We got a lot more to do with that. We also found a possible monument preform, possibly making a granite monument up here. It's shaped like the monument, like a Maya monument. It's tapered at one end. The edges show some pecking and shaping, suggesting that this might have been a monument. The other possibility is looking at the breakage patterns here. It's possible that this is how they knocked off this big flake, and then they're actually going to use these as preforms for the metates. Okay. Not sure about that, but we got more work to do with that. The last thing I'll talk about here with these quarries is we might actually have a granite shrine, and this one we're not really sure about yet. We have to do some more work here. We just documented this one and moved on. It's located on the eastern side of a quarry, but it was put here, right? It was erected to look in this way, and it was filled in placed to stand this way with local sediment. So it was basically placed, and this may represent, possibly, wonder if it represents a shrine. We know in Maya communities today, there's a belief in an owner of this supernatural owner of the things of the land. And oftentimes it gets talked about as somebody who owns the land that people farm. But there's been no documentation that I'm aware of any other kinds of material of communicating with that spirit, those beings ritually, for anything else besides chopping a milpa or chopping a cornfield. And so I'm one of the questions, given my background in landscape archaeology and cave rituals, which is where this earth owner lived, I wonder if we have perhaps evidence of some kind of ritual associated with the quarrying and production of these groundstone tools, because perhaps, again, we have a long way to go before we can say this with any kind of certainty, but perhaps there's a belief that some kind of supernatural being owned these granites and that they need to be petitioned to and thanked for allowing them to be harvested on the scale that they're being harvested. So what is that scale? Well, we have, like I said, about 10.5 to 11 hectares of site recorded. I want to go back to Tawny Tibbets's dissertation research and the portable X-ray fluorescence work that she has done. She worked with several projects throughout Belize, and what she found is that sites all up in northern Belize, through central Belize, pretty much, if these places are using granite monos and metates, they're actually getting that granite from the mountain pine ridge. She also surveyed the hummingbird granite here and the coxcomb basin granite over here. And by far, everything in orange here is going to be granite from the mountain pine ridge. And so what we're seeing is that most of the sites in central and northern Belize are getting their granite from this area. Whether or not they're getting it from this particular quarry, we don't know yet. Right? But the fact that it goes up into northern Belize does suggest to me that this granite is probably going up into Mexico as well. And just a couple of years ago, Christina Halperin from University of Montreal publishes a study with her graduate student who did PXRF of analysis of the groundstone tools from the site that she's studying of Ukanal, and some other sites in the area, Tikal and Yasha. And they do find that the pink here is Mountain Pine Ridge granite. So the Pine Ridge granite is actually getting all the way to Tikal in the central Petén of Guatemala. It's about representing about a third of the artifacts at Ukanal, Yasha. So we're looking at a significant portion of the southern Maya lowlands during the Classic period getting their groundstone tools from the Mountain Pine Ridge. Again, whether or not they're getting it from this particular quarry is yet to be seen. That's years down the road from now. But this area, if not this particular quarry, this area was supplying granite for a very, very significant portion of Classic period and late Classic period Maya society. We're looking at potentially millions of households getting their granite from this region. So this is a very significant site. So future research questions for these quarries is: who were the Maya working them? Where were they coming from? We're about 4 miles from Nohojpatso over an extensive, very difficult to navigate creek. So it's unlikely that it was people who lived at Nohojpatso working there. Was the production and distribution controlled or managed in any way? If so, by what sites? Again, local knowledge does tell of mounds in the nearby broadleaf forested areas. So were those people working and controlling the quarries? Is that where they lived? Is that where they were from? We do know archaeologists working outside of Pakpatun, just a couple of kilometers north of us, have found a granite workshop there. So are these preforms that we found being exported to other granite working sites like Pakpatun, or do these quarries represent perhaps a different supply chain? There's also some green and granitic rock quarries that Javi knows about in the area. So how do those relate to the Buffalo Hill quarries, and do they have the same kinds of components? Where are those granites going, those red and green granites going, and the products that are being made to use them? And then what role, if any, does ritual play in the production process? So wrapping up here now, just some future research questions. Looking at a regional perspective, right? Here's Nohojpatso down here, and then here's the Buffalo Hill quarries up here. Nohojpatso is the closest known center to the Buffalo Hill quarries. So were they controlling and organizing the work and the labor there and the products that are being produced there? We don't know yet. Right? We're both just getting started at both of these projects. This project is blown up in ways that I had never imagined when I started there in 2018. I started as a cave project, and here I am now with a site and a granite quarry. Right? How is Nohojpatso related to the other rumored quarries in the Mountain Pine Ridge? Was the site established to control and manage these resources? Right? What we do see with Nohojpatso is that a lot of those ceramics, those sensor fragments, are actually found at Caracol. So are we looking at perhaps an outpost of Caracol coming up here to control these resources? We don't know. Right? And then how does this site and the quarries factor into the geopolitics of the Eastern Maya lowland? This is a newly documented site in an area where just a few years ago the ancient Maya weren't thought to be at in any significant way, but what this research has shown is that there is a very significant presence of ancient Maya presence on the Mountain Pine Ridge, and we have a lot more to learn up there. So with that, thank you. I know I've gone a bit over time here, so thank you to all these folks, and thanks you to my team. I will happily take any questions now that you might have.
All right, thank you, John. As a reminder, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature located on your Zoom control panel. I believe we already have a few questions to start. So in the quarries, they only found monos and metates, no points?
So we haven't done any sort of, no, is the short answer. We haven't done any kind of survey there outside of just mapping what's on the surface. We've done no excavation or anything like that. So it's possible that there's and I'm assuming the question is projectile points or right. Nothing like that yet, but that's not to say that's not there. I mean, we've spent about a week mapping this, and then we had to move on. So, but so far it's just the granite, the quartzite, production tools, and the preforms. No, and the ceramics, but no other stone tools.
And so how do archaeologists determine that something is, for instance, a Maya shrine or something ritual?
That is a really good question. The cave sites that I worked at, we would consider those ritual places. Caves in the Maya area in the tropics are incredibly difficult places to live. They're for a variety of reasons. They have bugs and diseases in them. You have to have fire to stay in the deep caves, and there's not a lot of ventilation in the caves, and so it's going to be really hard to live there. And there's an abundance of much easier livable land just literally outside that's filled with resources. And so identifying a cave as a ritual, as a shrine, is a ritual place is pretty easy based on that. In terms of other areas, this is the and I'll point to this. This is the first granite quarry and groundstone production workshop ever found anywhere in the Maya region. So this is all new. So we have archaeologists kind of get a bad rap because if we don't understand it, we call it ritual. And so this might not be a shrine. This might be somehow related to the production process there that we don't know yet. We have to do some excavation and more cleaning of the area to try and learn more about it. But we'd look at the kinds of, in general, we'd look at the kinds of artifacts that are coming out of that site or that particular area of the site to identify it as ritual or not. So if we're finding things like obsidian blades and charcoal and decorative ceramics that have incense residue in them, something like that would be a good indicator of ritual practice. In the centers, the pyramids are going to be, those are ritual places. But in the landscape like this, this is we don't know, we just don't know what to do with this. And so it seems like it might have a ritual component to it, but that may not be the best interpretation of that. But it's it'll depend partially on the context, and then the artifacts that are associated with it that come out of it, any excavations that might get done there. If it's just jars and common ware, then it might be just a place that people were eating, or if it's incense and obsidian blades, which might suggest bloodletting, right? Then it'd be a ritual.
So this probably points to one of your future research questions that you were just mentioning, but is it so possibly these quarries are being used to produce manos and metates for export, or is it more likely this site was under control of Caracol as a resource base?
So any connection to Caracol is really tentative right now. It's just Caracol's close-ish by, and let me pull up. I have a lot of slides. So looking at, where's our map of Belize? So Caracol, that's not the best map to use. So the Caracol's road network comes up pretty close to from right around here or so. But that's kind of the furthest extent. That's some of these sites up here. This Terminus A and New Maria Camp are kind of up over in this area, so they're not actually into the Pine Ridge. And we're looking at Nohojpatso is up here, and then the granite quarries are even further north up here. This site is too large to just be, I would say, just be supplying Caracol. Based on the PXRF work of my colleagues, Dr. Halperin, her graduate students, and Dr. Tibbetts down here, and the fact that they're finding, upwards of, right up here, PFB, they're looking at 99% of their groundstone tools are granites from the mountain pine ridge. Buena Vista here is same, right? Bivar project, they're mostly there. Lamanai, 80%, San Esteban up here also, Pacbatoon 90%, more than 90%. There, and then over into Guatemala too, we have a significant number of proportion of the groundstone tools are coming from granites from the mountain pine ridge. And so I think this is probably, I'll just say this tentatively because we haven't spent much time up here, and we haven't even investigated further east of here really at all. But I think this is probably one of several quarries that are up here that are supplying the eastern lowlands with their granite. And so I think these are being exported and they're being made in this, probably not just here. And again, I can't say for sure because we have a lot more of the Pine Ridge to survey. So we've worked, let me see if I can put this back up. I'll draw on here. We're looking at having mapped, something like that much of it, and then pretty much all of this here, more or less, is granite. So, we have a lot more work to do up here before we can say definitively that this is the only source. I know there's somebody who lives up here locally who has a Mr. Monty Payne has what looks like a granite quarry in workshop also on his property a little bit further north from where we are. So I suspect this is just one, and I think one of many that will eventually document up here. And so they're sending these out throughout the eastern lowlands and into the central lowlands as well.
So where's the nearest source of quartzite used for the production tools?
We don't know the exact locations, but this whole other half over here, and then a good portion of the Maya Mountains down south of us is actually and it goes into Guatemala. It's a big geologic formation called the Santa Rosa Formation. And that's this mix of sedimentary rocks, slightly metamorphosized rocks. There's quartzite mixed in there. There's a whole bunch. It's a really complex geologic formation over here, and so it's kind of, it could be coming from anywhere over here, and if I'm understanding the geology correctly, even down over this way as well.
And then we have a comment from Michael Lawrence, who, having excavated at Pakpaktun's Mono Mound site, they postulated that the source materials came from the mountain pine ridge, and they said it will be fascinating to do more analysis to see if your quarries are indeed the parent locations.
I agree, Mike, and I know the work that you've done there and been involved with, and I'm really excited to work with you all on that, and to learn more about that, and to see the relationship between here and Pakpatun. So just for folks who don't know, Pakpatun is right up here.
We also have another comment saying that they believe Stela 9 and Lamanite is a pinkish quartzite. Might be curious to see where that came from.
Yeah, there's certainly with this, and especially the sourcing studies that have been done with the PXR sourcing studies, there's a lot of opportunity up here to learn more about the different types of raw materials that are coming from up here and the distribution of them. And certainly there's a lot of collaborative opportunities here to work with the other projects if they're interested. And if any of those folks are on, I'd be happy to talk more about some collaborative opportunities. So yeah, this is a really it's a really exciting area. And now we have a really good, strong documented presence of the Maya up here, and starting to understand just how much they're involved with the landscape and the ways that they're extracting resources from the landscape up here.
So what might the looters at the quarry pit been looking for?
Granite gravel. I don't think they're looking for anything. I think let's see if I can find it real quick. It's just gravel. I mean, it's really great gravel. So whatever you need gravel for, yeah. So I don't think there was a recognition of destroying an archaeological site. I think it was just that this is gravel and it's easily accessible gravel, and so it's put it in your front yard maybe, right?
So does the mountain pine ridge need better protection? Do these sites need better protection then, or is there an appropriate level of protection of these sites?
I mean, that's a really great question, and I think I think archaeological sites everywhere are threatened by development and threatened by pot hunting, and also just a lack of understanding of archaeological sites in general, right? That these are archaeological sites, that there's cultural heritage of countries, of people, of cultures. And so I would say worldwide there's sites need to be better protected, and so I would say that these sites need to be better protected too, just because of the nature of archaeology worldwide. But these are in a really remote part of the country. They're paving a big road through this area now, so we're going to see increased tourism in the area, and we're going to see increased use of this area, which does threaten these sites, right?
And how much, if any, of the mountain pine ridge has been surveyed using LiDAR?
Very little. That I've been involved with. We did get a LiDAR survey done that I'm still waiting on the results for, and I'll pull up my map again. And we basically have the green area here, and a little bit of the brown area here has been LiDAR surveyed, but we have all of this over here that has not been surveyed for archaeological sites. So there's a lot up here that's still that needs to be done, and LiDAR works at several different scales, and we got an aerial coverage of here from an airplane, but something like a drone LiDAR survey to get more detailed evidence of from sites, and more accurate, not more accurate maps, but more detailed maps of sites is certainly something that can always be done, and we can always add more data to understand these sites better. And so very little of this has been surveyed, but most of it has not been.
And finally, since I know you have an interest in photogrammetry, how has photogrammetry changed the way you study or approach your projects?
Oh, I mean, it's completely revolutionized archaeology, and it's completely changed the way that I've done research. So I've only hinted at this very briefly here, but showing the stela, I've started 3D modeling most everything. We get the stela, the Looter's Trench here has been 3D modeled, and that actually it allows us to collect a lot more data, and that so it makes our field time a lot more productive. And so we can collect the data, and we can actually process the models and work with the models at home. And I only use the 3D modeling as just one way of digitally recording sites. One of the things I've been doing in the caves is because Mason's publications were really his descriptions were vague, and so I have a virtual walking tour of caves A and cave C, and I'll put on an Oculus headset, and I'll put in load up the tours, and I'll actually do a close reading of Mason and read through his passages, and I'm actually able to identify through those descriptions, I'm actually visiting those places from my living room, where these pots are coming from. And so I'm actually able to use that to reconstruct the context of them. And within those virtual tours, I can also put the 3D models, and you pick it up and move it around, and it becomes a much more immersive experience, and allows me allows researchers to continually study those sites, even if we're not physically present, and then we can be digitally there and go back and make observations and that kind of things. And I can, you can share these with researchers worldwide. And so it's really revolutionized archaeology, and it's really democratizing technology as well, because it allows more people to access these things that they might only be able to see in a picture in a museum. And you can post a model online, and you get some digital tangibility of interacting with those objects.
Well, thank you, Jon, and thank you to everyone for attending tonight's Living Room Lecture. Just as a reminder, for more information on our upcoming events, please visit our website at sandiegoarchaeology.org. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.